The countdown has started for ESA astronaut Matthias Maurer, who has just been assigned to fly his first mission to the International Space Station in the autumn of 2021. The German astronaut will be the second ESA astronaut to fly under NASA's Commercial Crew Program and is expected to launch from Kennedy Space Center in a SpaceX Dragon crew capsule.
Hello world, wake me up to another good morning, time to go. Oh, we are all looking for adventure. We are all looking for adventure.
Hello everyone, today we are discussing with the European Space Agency's ESA astronaut Dr. Matthias Maurer, whose first mission to the International Space Station is scheduled for autumn 2021. So first of all, welcome Matthias.
Well, hello and thank you for having me, Kimo.
So this spring, set a bit of a background. I was at a cafe in Helsinki and at the time there was the ESA search for new astronauts ongoing, and I overheard a discussion between a young boy and his grandfather, and it was fascinating to listen to, eavesdrop, so to speak. And the grandson told the grandfather that ESA is currently looking for astronauts. And the grandfather answered that one day the grandson himself could become an astronaut. Was that your case, that you got inspired early on in your childhood?
I think spaceflight is very inspiring for everyone, and just to start with the good news, every one of us is already an astronaut because our planet Earth is a spaceship, the best spaceship that we have. And being a human being means like being an astronaut. So you see, it's not difficult to be an astronaut. But then for those of us astronauts who want to leave our mothership Earth and just venture around in space, yes, as a kid, I looked into the sky and I wanted to become a pilot, because in that area where I grew up, we had a lot of like deep flying, jet pilots. So they practice dogfights in the air, and I felt like this is like exploring the third dimension. That must be so exciting. But becoming an astronaut for me was actually a dream so big, I even didn't dare to start dreaming that one. Until this very special day in 2008, when I saw in the news on television that ESA is looking for new astronauts. And at that moment I thought, like, hang on, it's what does an astronaut actually do? And an astronaut today is a scientist, and I'm a scientist. An astronaut works with the best technology available, and we develop technology in space. And so I'm an engineer, and I like development, doing research. An astronaut today is a part of an international team. We have Americans, we have Russians, we have Canadians, we have Japanese, we have Europeans obviously up there. And many more people will fly to space very soon. We have Chinese in space. The Indians are developing their own spacecraft, fly to space. So being an astronaut also means like being an ambassador, working in international teams. And I love this international aspect. I studied in several European countries, and I also did internships in Latin America and in South Korea. And so I just simply love this aspect. And last but not least, it's the adventure, all the excitement, all the many people you meet, the many different trainings that you get, all the different aspects of science that you are allowed to get involved with. This is like becoming an astronaut. And that's why I decided, like, I want to become an astronaut.
And when I was a kid, I did the same thing. I gazed into the night sky, and I often, because I lived in an area where there was a almost complete lack of light pollution, so I could see the Milky Way above me, and it was so incredibly overwhelming to look at the stars and imagine what could be out there. But I wasn't even dreaming of becoming a pilot, let alone an astronaut at the time. So would you say that your background is a typical background for an astronaut? You said that they are mostly scientists, but what is a typical background, or is there such a thing as a typical background?
Well, to become an astronaut, ESA requires you to have either a technical background, to be either an engineer or a scientist for biology or for chemistry, for physics, to be a medical doctor or to be a test pilot. So you see, piloting is one aspect and scientist and engineer is the other aspect. And that's basically what we are doing now in space. These are the two challenges that you require, the two sets of skills that we need to perform our work in space.
You are currently in Russia, and the reason for that is that you are in training in Russia, right?
Yes.
Is the launch to the International Space Station also taking place from Russia?
You see, like all my colleagues from ESA so far, they launched, or at least in the last 10 years, they launched on a Russian spacecraft, on a Soyuz spacecraft from Baikonur. But now we are coming into a transition where there are new vehicles being prepared, which are enabling the access to space. And one of these new American vehicles is the Dragon spacecraft, flying on a Falcon 9 rocket. And I will be flying on such a Crew Dragon capsule. Thomas Pesquet, who's currently in space, he's been the very first European flying to space in such a new modern spacecraft. I will be the first German to go there. And and up there in space, we will dock to the International Space Station and do the work for the next 6 months. Before you ask, what is the typical job training or the typical requirement to become an astronaut? So ESA requires to be either a pilot or to be an engineer or a scientist. But then you look at the different agencies and you see that, for example, the German astronauts so far, I will be number 12, they have all been physicists. And I'm now a material scientist, which is basically half a physicist and half a chemist. And that reflects the focus that the German Space Agency sets on the work in space. We basically, we are there in space to do research. Among the 12, there were 2 fighter pilots, but they were selected at a time when Europe still had a dream to fly the Hermes spacecraft to the International Space Station. Now, in the new spacecraft that are available, the Space Dragon, the Crew Dragon, the European astronauts don't have any task to pilot this spacecraft anymore. On one side, because the craft is so automatic, it does everything by itself. But on the other hand, it's mostly the American astronauts who get the training because it's a commercial entity. SpaceX is the very first, or one of the very first companies, having a deal with NASA to provide a transport of astronauts to the International Space Station. The other company is Boeing. And hopefully we will see also later this month that the test flight of Boeing, the Starliner, without astronauts on board, will find its way to the International Space Station. And when I'm on board of the space station, hopefully I will see also astronaut colleagues arrive on the ISS in the new Boeing spacecraft.
Yeah, you are there at a very exciting point in history. I wanted to also go back a little bit to the requirements of an astronaut required to become an astronaut, what is required, specifically the psychological part. Because obviously you need to be a very stable personality to cope with the pressure of being in a confined space for a prolonged periods of time with a limited number of colleagues. But when you watch some space movies, there's always conflict, that there's always tension and somebody snaps and the whole thing falls apart. But that never happens on the International Space Station. So what is the psychological requirements of an astronaut?
You summarized it already pretty well. We live for 6 months or an extended period of time in space together in a confined environment. 2 of us will actually be there for a year when I arrive. 2 of the colleagues will not fly back, but will stay for 6 more months. So that means you have people there that speak different languages. You have people from different cultural background. and you have a different level of skills and expertise. There are new guys like me, just freshly arrived on the space station, and for us everything is new, but others already have a lot of months on their back and probably already kind of tired and or in a steady state mood. And this team needs to work efficiently, and also when there is a crisis, like an emergency, for example, we have a leak or we have like poisonous gas in the air, or we have a drop of pressure, or fire on board. So all these emergency cases, we need to be efficient as a team, and nobody should snap at the other person. So we need to be very attentive, and we need to care about each other. That's the most important. And we also need to be open to each other. And whenever there is something that probably I don't like, and the other person isn't really aware that he or she is doing something that is kind of stepping on my toes, I shouldn't just swallow it. I need to speak up and say, like, okay, this and this, please do it differently, before I accumulate so much stress that I start snapping, and that should never happen. But every one of us is also pre-selected during the entire astronaut selection process, so that we are all kind of stable persons. Every round in the astronaut selection process, we had psychologists looking at us, just checking how we react to certain input from the outside, and also how we behave as a team player. You need to have a leader, and you also need to have followers, and every one of us should be able to lead and to follow. As a team, you cannot be successful if everyone wants to lead, but in a different direction. So it's the social skills and the social interaction is very, very important.
So what is your particular scientific mission? What are you focusing on the ISS?
As an ESA astronaut, I will bring a set of European experiments, in my case around 35 experiments, but I also have American, Japanese experiments that I take part in. And so in total, I will have between 100 and 150 different experiments. And I'm a material scientist, and material science, as you know, is very, very important for innovation. So most of the processes, new patents, new technology, has some part of new material involved. And so I'm very much looking forward to having new materials tested in space, and that driving innovation, driving new products for like the people on the ground. Material science is only one part of my experiment suite. A big set is also us astronauts, human being, like medical experiments. How does the human body adapt to space? How does it change? So we know already from all the space flights before that we have a loss of muscle, a loss of bones, we have a fluid shift, the immune system gets weaker. But we only recently figured out that all the eyes of the astronauts also deteriorate. So that is a big question, why the eyes are getting worse. And currently there's even a hypothesis, if we extend the damage to the eyes and look at a mission to Mars, it might even be that some of the astronauts who fly 500 days in space and arrive at Mars, that they will be blind. And obviously, so that's a very important point that we need to understand, that we need to control, that we need to find a solution to this issue. And so a lot of the studies focus on this eye problem.
There are numerous still unknown medical challenges that human is not adapted. Human is adapted to stay on this planet, and once we are transported to another planet, there's numerous unknowns that probably need to be solved before we even plan on going there. How do you plan to stay fit? Apart from, of course, things that you cannot impact yourself, but how do you plan to stay fit?
As an astronaut, we need to do like roughly 2 hours of sports every day, like 1 hour of cardio and 1 hour of muscle training. So that shall stimulate our muscle growth and also the bone growth. I will actually bring a new device up there, which is an electro-muscle stimulation suit. I will wear this suit while doing sports, and hopefully this device will even increase the benefit of my exercise program. We also want to see how much we can reduce the physical load while doing sports. So I'm actually lifting weight. It's in zero gravity, it's not a weight, but it's I push against the pressure, a vacuum system is pulling. And so with this new suit, hopefully we can reduce the actual physical load and make the physical, like the sports equipment, smaller. The idea is, once we fly in an Orion capsule to the moon or later on to Mars, I cannot bring a full gym like the gym that we have currently on the space station. We have like quite some fancy equipment up there. So that's a very important experiment that I will be running to see if the combination of a small, lightweight sports equipment with electric stimulation of the muscles can bring the same benefit. The other approach to stay fit in space is nutrition. So I did quite some effort to pre-select my food, and I'm very happy also to see that my countrymen from my home region in Germany helped me to select some space food. So it's the combination of good food and public support that will carry me forward.
I also heard in one podcast a couple of interesting things. One was regarding the food, is that since there are different crews from different crew members from different countries, that you share each other's foods every now and then. So you get variation. For example, Russians have a lot of fish, so they offer fish. And
for the food, it's quite a sophisticated process. So there is around 60-70% of the food is already pre-selected for you. NASA sends up a standard set of food. So you have soups in there, you have some staples in there, you have some meat or vegetables, and this food is for breakfast, for lunch, and also for dinner. But then the last quarter of the food, you actually can choose yourself. You can choose it from a pool of available food that is a little bit more sophisticated, but you can also select it like from your home space agency. So every European astronaut is allowed to bring like 2 or 3 different dishes that are then developed for him or her. And I can also choose Russian space food. So out of the food that I can select, roughly 30% comes from Russia, and 30% or 40% comes from Europe, and the last 30-40% is a mixture of commercial food, which is canned and or dried, so it needs to be specially prepared and like long time stable, and that I could all choose myself. Now,
do you always have to eat by yourselves, or do you also have joint lunch times with all of the crew?
So the ISS, it's you said like a confined space, a confined environment, but actually it's pretty big. And so the time that the astronauts spend together is very important. And so breakfast, lunch and dinner is scheduled in a way that we have this time together. And so we eat together, we share our experiences, we also share like what went wrong or what went well during the day. And so it's important to have this time together. It's a social activity, while also important to keep the team synchronized on all the events that's ongoing.
All right. Then returning to your earlier point regarding the fitness, again in another podcast that had to do with the International Space Station, there was the claim that vibration is to be avoided on the International Space Station. For example, if you would jump, you cannot really jump there, but if you would bang something continuously, it would create a vibration that could break up sections of the space station. Is that true?
It's true that jumping is not allowed on the space station. I'm not sure if you could jump that hard that you actually could break off a piece of the space station. I think it's more that you would start vibrations that then are negative for all the science on board of the station. You see, we fly to space because we have zero gravity. And so a lot of these experiments, they require the best zero gravity ever. And if you look into the details, there's only the center of gravity of the space station, which has the purest like 0G. But all other labs that are a little bit off the center of gravity, they all always have like a tiny little bit of remaining gravity inputs into your scientific experiments. And so the astronauts like very much, for example, floating through the space station. And once you arrive, for example, in the Japanese module, you arrive at the end and then you give yourself a push and you can fly into the storage module. And that's actually a nice place to do a kind of a jumping jack, like to push yourself up and down and up and down. And so almost all the astronauts, every single astronaut who flew to the space station felt this temptation to do it. And then you hear, when you're on console, and I worked as Eurocom before, you hear on the ground like, Station Houston, is there somebody jumping around again? Because the engineers on the ground see it, they see the vibration, and that has such a negative effect on our science that we need to stop it immediately. But you're also right, jumping is a very good activity and it's very good for your fitness. Scientists actually want to make us jump on the moon because jumping fosters your muscle activity, and jumping also is very good for your bone growth. So don't be surprised, once we're on the moon, you see jumping astronauts again.
Yeah. Once you have exhausted your 6 months on the space station, hopefully jumping as much as possible, you will be returning. What is the return vehicle that you will be returning to Earth with?
The vehicle that we fly up with is normally also the vehicle in which I will return. There have been in the past some exceptions when an astronaut flew up on a space shuttle and returned on a Soyuz capsule, or the other way around. And currently the Soyuz and the Dragon vehicle, they are both certified for around 6-7 months on board of the station. And I told you in the beginning that I will have colleagues who will spend a year in space. So these colleagues who stay longer than 6-7 months, they fly down in a different vehicle than they fly up with. But it's still the same vehicle type. So if you fly up in a Soyuz, you will also return in a Soyuz, just in a different Soyuz. It's because your spacesuit is like fitting to the vehicle, and the seat liners are fitting to the Soyuz spacecraft. So you cannot just simply jump over from a Soyuz spacecraft into a Crew Dragon.
Returning to the Earth has been described by many astronauts as being nearly a religious experience, that you experience this exhilaration, of course, from the fact that you're returning home, but seeing Earth in a new way. Have you heard these stories, and what do you think you will feel when you get back here, when you get over the first 1 or 2 days, of course, that you see your loved ones and so forth? What do you think the experience will be like for you?
I think flying to space and arriving there, I will have my very first experience. A lot of astronauts describe it as the overview effect. When you're a kid, you grow up, and just recently when I returned to my home village, I showed some of the journalists, the local journalists, like my preferred space in the forest, and it's overlooking the village, and you can see quite far. You can see to the next town, and you can see all the surrounding villages. And suddenly I realized from this place I could see where the first 20 years of my life took place. And I thought, like, wow, I lived in such a narrow and tiny world, a happy life, first 20 years. But then now becoming an astronaut is like I travel between the countries, and for me it seems like going from Europe to the US, going to Russia, going to Asia. It's something that is almost normal, and the world has shrunk so much. And being in space, when I look down to the ground, I probably will see that I can almost cover the entire planet with my hand and just lose it out of sight and say like, wow, what used to be so huge, so enormous that I barely could understand like how huge it is, suddenly shrinks down to a tiny little ball. And then you feel that everything that has ever taken place in the history of mankind, everything takes place in the area that is covered with the atmosphere. And the atmosphere is what all the astronauts describe as this golden lining around our planet. And most astronauts who arrive in space and see this lining when the sun is shining from the back and gives this golden layer, they feel like our planet is so fragile and we need to take care of it and to protect it. And so I expect fully that I will have these very strong emotions. And then coming back to the ground, I hopefully will become an ambassador just to promote this idea, like let's take care of our planet, let's protect it more, let's make sure that all the generations after us have the same chance to have a prosper life like us, that I will promote this.
I couldn't agree more, especially in the optics of today's situation in Germany. You have had massive floods that resulted in loss of life. We are in a situation where we can still make an impact and turn the way around and save this planet. I can only imagine what it feels up there. There's this famous image that most of us know, the pale blue dot. One ray of the ray of light coming from the sun, and this little blue dot. Everything that we ever have known, everything that everyone who ever lived on this planet was in this one blue dot. It's just a little grain of salt in the huge vacuum of space. So we are not really adapted to live anywhere else. So we should first and foremost take care of this place before we have to move anywhere else. 2 billionaires have been to space. Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos, along with his brother and many other people, were on board these 2 missions. I have my own idea and opinion on the space tourism. What is your take on space tourism in general?
You're right, we're now entering a new era of spaceflight. So we've seen 2 billionaires flying in 2 different spacecrafts on a suborbital flight and touching space for a few minutes and then returning down to the ground. Only in September we will see the next step. Another billionaire will fly in a spacecraft with no professional astronaut and circle our planet for 3 to 5 days. It's the Inspiration 4 mission. And then in October, we will see that a Russian actress and a Russian director will fly to the International Space Station and film the very first space movie actually shot in space. Very little afterwards, I will arrive with my 3 other professional astronauts. Early December, we will see then 2 Japanese space tourists arrive on the space station. A billionaire who flies to the International Space Station, but who also bought already a ticket on a SpaceX Starship to fly around the moon. And then in January, we will see 3 more billionaires coming to the International Space Station, coming up with this time on an American spacecraft, and be probably only the very first tourist. There will be more to come. And so I have also, like you, a lot of thoughts about this topic. On one side, I see that the more people come to space, the more people will have the same emotions that I will live through and become ambassadors for our planet Earth. And so I think there is a positive side to it. Obviously, flying to space, you create a lot of CO2, you create probably also some space debris, and that will have negative impacts and probably make the access to space even more questionable for space tourism. But I think like opening the door for space tourism, if it's a sustainable way that we open for the tourist, then it will be for the benefit even for professional astronauts and for scientists. So the two billionaires who just flew on a suborbital flight, for example, they developed a hardware that will, it can and it will be used for scientists to have experiments in zero G for several minutes. Currently, we either fly on a suborbital, like on a parabolic flight with 22 seconds of zero gravity in a spacecraft, or we fly to the International Space Station. So in the past, I've seen that quite some equipment that arrived on the space station had some issues. It didn't work as designed and we needed to fix it. So we invested a lot of resources to fix stuff in space, which should have arrived like in 100% perfect condition in space. On the other hand, we also over-design a lot of experiments because we have this experience that stuff fails in space. And over-designing makes it more expensive, makes it slower. Having now the suborbital capabilities, I hope that we will fly a lot of technology during 5-6 minutes to space, test it in zero gravity, and then learn so much about it that you can provide faster access and better equipment for experiments on the International Space Station. Also, we can test some technology and I mean, you are supporting startup companies in Finland, and there are lots of other bigs around Europe. So for these small companies, I believe like a cheaper and a faster access to space, like through suborbital flights, is crucial to be fast and to develop very good hardware.
So once you have completed this mission on the ISS, what do you plan to do next?
So when I return from space, the first weeks and months will be for rehabilitation, because even with all the sports and fitness program in space, my body will suffer, and so I need some exercise time and rehabilitation time to become as fit as I was before the flight. Then usually an astronaut becomes part of a project, and your next flight will be only after 4 or 5 years. So the next projects that we are currently working on is preparing our future on the Gateway station. It's a new station that will be flying around the moon, and after that on the surface of the moon. And on the moon, we want to develop and harden all the technology that we need for a sustainable life on the surface of another planet. And this planet will be in the future Mars. But before we can fly to Mars, we need to make sure that the technology works. And the best place to test it is our neighbor, it's the moon. We want to study on the moon how to build a station using the moon resources, like the lunar sand. We want to make oxygen out of what we find there, the resources. We want to make water, or like extract water from the ground to drink. But water is also hydrogen and oxygen, and this is exactly rocket fuel. So the moon could become a pit stop where the rockets fly from our planet to an orbit around the moon, or maybe even land on the moon, get refueled, and then continue their journey towards Mars. You can also refuel satellites in our geostationary orbit around the Earth from the moon. It's from a physical point of view, it's way more efficient than flying the fuel from our planet. It's just because the moon is so much lighter, has such a reduced mass compared to our planet Earth.
You just introduced very interesting ideas into potential business incubation ventures. Because as you said, we have dozens of business incubation centers of the European Space Agency scattered throughout Europe. And these missions and plans that you just mentioned are very interesting topics for new ventures. So get in touch with your local business incubation centers and propose interesting new projects and get funded. I would like to introduce towards the end of this very interesting chat with you a friend that you have met 2 years ago, and it's this. It has your signature on it.
I remember.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, you visited the Slush Startup Conference 2 years ago when before the COVID struck us, and met with a lot of startup entrepreneurs and a lot of other people at the Slush conference. Hopefully you will stay safe and healthy and are able to complete your mission successfully. And I hope to be chatting with you either at some point, if you have time to send us greetings from the space station, or afterwards. And I wish you all the best for your mission and all the best for your future endeavors as well.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, definitely. I hope to stay in touch, to send you the best greetings from space, also to send you motivation, because I think you're the future of Europe, like fostering and helping the new startups to become successful, to stand on their own legs. That is so important. We need new guys, new ideas, and we need new startups. Just otherwise, we will be stuck with the same old technology. And exploring the future in space requires the best talents that Europe has to offer.
Hello world, wake me up to another good morning.